We are wrapping up this series that we have been doing on the powers today with looking at one final power, and that being the power of security. And if you remember, the powers are the things that we just assume about the world. We just assume that's the way that things operate, that's the way that things work. And because of that, whether consciously or subconsciously, we shape our minds and our lives and our ideals around certain things that we just assume to be so. Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 6 that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers of this dark world. In other words, the way that the world does things, the way that we assume things just work, is actually in a bent against God and a bent against the way that God does things. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about, our final thing, is this idea of security. The illusion of security. It operates on a power, and we believe that it separates us from those who could be harmed or would be harmed. And certainly we should be safe. Certainly we should lock our homes, our cars. Certainly we should take regular, normal precautions and looking out for our families and looking out for our lives and our homes and those sorts of things. But this is specifically around the idea that we can gain enough, have enough, buy enough, know enough to protect us from all the dangers that are out there. In Proverbs chapter 18, the writer says this, and let me read it to you in verse 11. He says, "The wealth of the rich is their fortified city." Okay, in other words, what they have, they presume to be a fortified city. And then listen to this phrase. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. In other words, it's not even what they think it is. And I think that's one of the things that happens in this ideal of security, that sometimes we just imagine it to be greater than it is. And it's an illusion of what we have. The other part of it is it can become consuming. It can keep us from living a life of faith, living a life of trust, because we spend a lot of time making sure that we have enough, are aware enough, have planned enough, and all of these other sort of things that put us in a position of control. Another verse from Proverbs, and it's probably a verse that some of you all are familiar with, it's in Proverbs chapter 3, and it says this, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." The call for us when it comes to this issue of security is to prepare well, but then trust in God, to lean upon Him, which means not this is the final thing I'm going to do, but a day-by-day, step-by-step. In fact, even in our decision-making on providing security should be the question of, are we trusting God? Are we even communicating with Him? Or is this something we just presume that we have to do because this is the way the system works? If that's the case, then that truly is revealing that this is a power that we're functioning under its authority without really evaluating the control it has over our lives, and whether or not that control is something that we should be surrendering to God and looking to Him for answers. The other thing about it is in Psalms chapter 33, the powers give us the presumption that we can do enough. In Psalm 33, it refers to the king who believes he can buy an army large enough to protect him. And sometimes when it comes to security, there is that belief that we can do enough to ensure our own well-being. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 34 is a passage that's familiar to probably all of us, and it's Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. And He makes this statement, "Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." And the King James, which I love, says this, "Therefore do not give any thought." Okay? Now, it's interesting the way that one's worded, which is why I think it's so touching, because right before that, Jesus says this, "And why do you worry about clothes?" In other words, why are you thinking or consumed by these things? And He says, "See how the flowers of the field grow, they do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these." It's not that Jesus tells us we shouldn't worry. It's that He tells us, relative to the things that we can see, the things that we do know, we should not be worrying. In other words, security doesn't leave us in a future tense. Security is in being in a present tense. And I think this is where it exerts a lot of power over us, is security, the idea of security, constantly puts us in a future tense, where we assume the worst case scenario and we assume the best case outcome if we take certain steps. But Jesus calls us to live in the present moment, where we look around us and see what is happening around us and understand that God is an authority and God is in control. And that is what we should meditate upon. Doesn't mean we don't lock our doors, doesn't mean we don't ensure the safety of our families, but it means that in that moment, as we look around, we recognize what God is doing and what God is bringing about. And as we do so, our security will become rooted in Him. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.